When George R. R. Martin was finishing A Dance with Dragons, he was forced to move many chapters into his next volume, The Winds of Winter. This will have included most, if not all, of the preview chapters that we've had for that book so far, as well as one chapter that we have not had, but that would have given us a huge amount of insight as to where the story is going and how it gets there. In my previous video, I looked at the very first BRAN chapter of A Game of Thrones, and how it was the original inspiration for the A Song of Ice and Fire series. It was where George R. R. Martin planted the seeds of these characters, which have since sprawled far beyond the original inspiration of Bran finding wolf pups in the summer snows. Whilst writing this first book, Martin originally intended it to be the first of 3 novels, of which A Dance with Dragons would be the second. But the plot expanded and sprawled into 3 extra novels dealing with the War of the Five Kings and its aftermath, and this saw Bran's journey north of the Wall move at a slow, pondering pace. But in A Dance with Dragons, we finally see Bran in training to sit on the Weirwood throne. We see the power that this orphaned and crippled child can have on the world around him, giving him access to the past, and, with the right tutelage, make him able to slip into the trees of the north and into the skins of animals to influence the future. It is a callback to the older way of Westeros, where magic and religion were real things, and where the trees in the north were gods to be worshipped and voices to be followed. And it is no coincidence that on this journey north, Bran has become surrounded and nurtured by characters who are all somehow linked to this older way. Bloodraven, the seemingly ageless half-Targaryen, half-Blackwood sorcerer, gives the appearance of being George R. R. Martin's personification of the ancient weirwood trees. His one red eye and white skin, as well as the raven-shaped birthmark, seem to have assigned him from birth as a medium through which the power of the old gods can be harnessed. Similarly, prior to reaching Bloodraven's cave, Jojen and Mira Reed were nothing if not stand-ins for the children of the forest. Their slight stature, green-seeing abilities, and deep respect for the older way are callback to the indigenous people of Westeros. Along with Bran's direwolf Summer and the giant Hodor, these are all the representatives of the older way accounted for, and they will each play an important role in Bran's future. And so in his last chapter in A Dance with Dragons, Bran gets to awaken his powers as a greenseer, using the memory of the weirwood trees to take him back to his home of Winterfell and to observe glimpses of events that have happened in its Godswood. They show us visions of times past as we travel back through the Stark bloodline to an ancient time where blood sacrifice was still practiced. And it may well be that through the apparent sacrifice of a sickly Jojen Reed, Bran has already had a literal taste of these old customs. We also see Bran develop his skin-changing skills, warging into a raven, seeing through its eyes, and flying through Bloodraven's cave. And we have seen these powers before, most notably through Bran's cruel and immoral taking of Hodor's body to make him feel the size and strength of a human. Whilst the implications of these new powers are immense, the darkness that serves as Bran's protection, nourishment, and as a source of strength is a clear indication of how George R. R. Martin views the world in which he let his characters grow. There is a lightness and darkness in all of us, and whilst Bran has heroically battled against a tragic fate that first took his legs and then took his family, there might not be too much that is heroic about what he eventually takes back. This is the context that frames the mysterious 4th chapter due for inclusion in A Dance with Dragons. It left us on a knife edge, with Bran tasting the blood from centuries past, and now being able to access the memories of the weirwoods that could take him on journeys throughout Westerosi history and give a tantalising glimpse into what really happened to create the threat in the north. But this portal of intrigue and wonder has been tempered by the fact that these powers have been awoken by a pace that likely came from a human companion. There is a darkness in Bran's existence now, one that haunts his present state but that feeds his visions of the past. We will likely see both sides of this play out in a chapter that the author deemed too expository or revealing for inclusion at the end of this novel. We know that George R. R. Martin struggles with writing for Bran. These are chapters that will explore magic, time, and the darkness in all of us, and writing this from a child's perspective is an added challenge. It famously took him 6 years to complete just one chapter for A Dance with Dragons. And yet, even though there are only 3 of these chapters in the published version of the novel, it looks very likely that Bran was present in at least a few more. Melisandre saw a version of him in her flames, and we can see evidence of a mystical presence haunting Winterfell, the one place we know that Bran can reach. In Theon's A Prince of Winterfell chapter, we see Theon walk Jane Poole through the Godswood on the way to her wedding. He feels the eyes of the weirwood trees and the ravens on him as he walks, and when he gets to the heart tree where the ceremony takes place, he hears his name whispered in the wind, coming to him as a rustle in the leaves. 2 chapters later, in A Ghost of Winterfell, Theon again hears what he assumes to be the old god saying his name, which leads him to break down and reflect on the fracturing of his identity, before a leaf strokes his face and he hears the word Bran in his ear. At this point, when internally we see Theon consider how the gods must be aware of his sins against the Stark family, he sees Bran's face appear in the heart tree. The presence of Bran in this chapter is enough to provoke a soul-searching in Theon, and when we see him in subsequent chapters, he now answers to his name and seems to have rediscovered some of his personality and purpose. However, in these chapters it is a one-sided interaction that Theon has, with his pleading to the gods being mainly a projection of his own guilt. But in Theon's preview chapter from the Winds of Winter, if you look closely, you can see what could be a dialogue between the characters in the scene and the ravens present inside Stannis' watchtower. And it is the very last passage of this chapter that is especially interesting. When Stannis insists that Theon must die to placate his northern followers, Theon's sister Asha desperately tries to avoid her brother getting burnt alive, and so asks instead for a swift death by a weirwood tree, a sacrifice to the old gods that would suit the Northmen and their traditions. We already know from late on in A Storm of Swords, when Stannis and Melisandre added the caveat of Winterfell's Godswood being burned to his offer of Jon becoming Lord of Winterfell, that Stannis performing any kind of rite that would question the power of his own god R'hllor would be out of the question. But the reason this exchange has been put at the climax of an extremely eventful chapter is because of the response that it provokes in the ravens. Whilst one bird acts in a way consistent with the other appearances of ravens in the series so far, repeating the final sentences of overheard conversations, another raven repeats Theon's name, just like in the weirwoods of Winterfell's Godswood. At least one of these voices must come from Bran. He is reminding Theon of who he is, who he really is, a young man raised at Winterfell as a ward to Eddard Stark. This has already given Theon the courage to partly break free from Ramsay Snow's hold on him, and to help lead Jane Poole to the relative safety of the Wall. And now, it seems to have returned a little of his boldness in his dealings with Stannis. It could even lead to him playing a small role in the retaking of Winterfell. In this scene, he is talking with Bran, even though he does not know it. So even if Theon does not survive much into the Winds of Winter, he will die having reconciled his true identity. This is a return to the Theon character we knew in the early novels, free from the guilt of having betrayed the Stark family and from the trauma of his torture at the hands of Ramsay. And it is the first indication of the kind of effect Bran can have on characters in this series from his Greenseer throne. And this is what I think we will see in the Lost Bran chapter from A Dance with Dragons. We will see Bran's side of these interactions, watching Theon as he escorts Jane to be married to Ramsay, and then witnessing him repent his betrayal of the Stark family in front of a weirwood tree. And then perhaps we will also see him outside of Winterfell, lending his voice to a raven in the Crofters' village where Stannis is preparing to eventually retake Winterfell in the name of the Starks. Bran will not just be haunting Theon in these chapters. He is interacting with him, influencing him, even talking with him, and he is demonstrating how his powers of green-seeing and skin-changing are progressing to a level where he can seek individuals out and influence their thoughts and actions, not unlike his tutor. And with Bloodraven's guidance, he will be able to use this influence outside the walls of Winterfell. And so if Bran can go as far as the Crofters' village, what is to stop him going even further north? We have an interesting observation from Melisandre that her magical powers seem to be at maximum strength at the wall, as if there is something there that allows for more mystical elements of this story to come into effect. And as she sees both Bran and Bloodraven in her visions, perhaps they have been present at the wall for some time. Throughout the A Song of Ice and Fire series, we've seen how Jeor Mormont's old raven has repeatedly inserted itself into conversations at the wall, and there are theories that at certain points of the story, and especially in A Dance with Dragons, some of these words come from Bloodraven himself, using the raven's voice to help manipulate events. In Jon's penultimate chapter, he is having a dream where he is defending the wall by himself, clad in black armour and with a burning sword, where his Night's Watch brothers have deserted him and left him to face the wildlings by himself. The dream ends with his half-brother Robb standing before him, and Jon slaying him while shouting, "I am the Lord of Winterfell." And when he wakes, it is as a result of a raven pecking at his chest. Soon afterwards, the raven chirps the words "King" and then "Jon Snow." Given that Jon has this dream the night before he lets thousands of wildlings through the wall, it could easily be explained away as a well-earned anxiety dream. But there are details in this short passage that suggest a deeper meaning, and also of a message being sent to Jon while he sleeps. Him being clad in black armour is a definite reference to his father Rhaegar Targaryen, and the burning sword is surely a nod to the Azor Ahai prophecy that so consumed Rhaegar right up until his death. Jon, however, knows nothing of this, so why would he be dreaming it? And when Robb turns up out of nowhere to be confronted by a painful reaction to Jon's memory of their time at Winterfell, what Jon shouts at his brother contradicts the hidden truth of his heritage. Jon is not the Lord of Winterfell. His true claims, as the raven suggests once he has awoken, is as the one true king and the ruler of the 7 kingdoms. That Jon is dreaming of his Targaryen lineage is the clearest indicator yet that Bloodraven is trying to influence his mind. These are not like Jon's wolf dreams, where he inhabits the perspective of Ghost, or even when he dreams of Winterfell's crypts, somewhere he knows, fears, and holds a deep reverence for. This image of Jon, clad in black armour with a burning sword, is one that has been given to him, and the raven calling him king as good as confirms this. Jon even notices the oddity of the raven using his full name, something it has not done before, and that in reality would have had to have been trained into doing. And so it is intriguing to think how the other side of this interaction could be seen from Bran's point of view. The emotions he would feel whilst he watches Bloodraven send Jon messages, potentially even warning him of his fate, would be far more heightened than what we would see when Bran interacts with Theon. Bran and Jon have very little time together on page, but they have an extremely strong brotherly bond, as we saw in the very first chapter of A Game of Thrones. The idea that the reader could potentially see the mutiny at the wall from the perspective of Bran skin changing into a raven is something that could plunge Bran deeper into the darkness of the trees. And so whilst a growing part of Bran will lose himself within the memories of the past, the part of him that exists in the present will be full of anguish, guilt, and regret. It is likely that he would not want to stay here long, especially now he has experienced the betrayal and death of his beloved half-brother. And so if Bran is in any way present during the time of Jon's death, he will be desperate to preserve whatever life remains inside his half-brother. Green-seeing and skin-changing are huge themes in A Dance with Dragons. The Varamir Sixskins prologue chapter gave a preview into how they will affect the story. in terms of seeing through the eyes of other beings, and in being able to grasp a second life once your human body has been killed. But the other theme of this preview chapter is the darkness that can come with such powers, and the 3 stated abominations that act as temptations for a skinchanger. We have seen Bran commit 2 of these, and the worst by far is the taking of a human body. And surely, somewhere deep inside Bran's 9-year-old mind is a lingering guilt and a shocking comprehension of his recurring mistreatment of Hodor. In the Game of Thrones TV show, we were given a complicated and slightly vague dramatisation of Hodor's past mind becoming permanently broken due to interference from Bran at some point in the future. What seems certain is that Hodor will be called on to use his strength to hold off some kind of attack from the others, and in so doing will have his mind warped in a way where his final moments of holding the door will become entangled with his past self. This will be the cost of Bran's abomination. It is the cost of taking a human mind without consent, and it is also, perhaps, the very human cost of using magic to ward off the coming darkness. Because this darkness is Bran's home now, it is where he will find his purpose during the winds of winter, and so probably why this chapter was too dark for inclusion in A Dance with Dragons. The balancing of power with personal growth is one that George R. R. Martin plays with throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. He does not believe in an all-powerful entity unless it comes at a cost. Because of this, there is no pure good nor pure evil, but just a collection of characters with different goals, in a world where misfortune is frequently balanced with a heightened sense of purpose, and where hubris inevitably leads to disaster. When Bran loses his legs, he has his third eye opened. When he has to crawl and battle his way past the wall and into the cave of his new tutor, he is rewarded with superhuman powers that allow him not to walk, but to fly. And now, in using these powers, the cost will be significant. The death of Hodor and of Jojen Reed will mirror the way that the giants and the children will soon cease to exist. It is the end of the older way as we know it. And so, at some point in the story, these will be huge plot points in a new battle for the Dawn. And even if they are not addressed in this lost chapter from A Dance with Dragons, we have been assured that the Winds of Winter will be the darkest volume of the series so far. And in that darkness, a 9-year-old child will have to slip further into the realm's unconscious state to battle the dead.